Good morning. I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm here with Ian Burns, and we're going to have Ian on camera here in about, hopefully, within the week. We're just fixing some technical stuff. He's all the way in from Ottawa, so we're going to have him on the screen as well. So the people that did write in and say or made a comment saying, "Why can't we see Ian's face?" You will see it shortly, but you can see it in that little tiny box down on the corner there. So there you go. Um, we start off with the premiers are about to meet with Justin Trudeau to discuss the tariffs. Um, any thoughts on that, Ian?
Yeah, well, it's happening behind closed doors. So we saw like a little intro that they did, but then they turned the cameras off because they're going to brief certain members of the press about the plan, the border plan, and so on. And then in the afternoon, I think they're going to talk about the potential reprisals that they're going to unload if Trump does go ahead with this mega tariff. And I think the highlight so far was Doug Ford wearing a baseball cap with a Canadian flag on it on the side, and the words "Canada's not for sale" on the front.
Well, Doug Ford and Daniel Smith have been the two most outspoken and the ones that are trying to do the most. I mean, both. I mean, a lot of trade comes out of both Ontario and Alberta.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the sort of the big boy provinces in Canada are Ontario, Quebec, BC, and Alberta, aren't they? And
Mhm.
yet, two of those provinces you haven't really heard very much from, and one of them, unfortunately, is BC. And I mean, I know Renee Merrifield is. And she's not the only one, but she's been very vocal, hasn't she, in her criticism of his lack of visibility on this.
Yeah, we're a resource-rich province, but sometimes we don't really want to play that card.
Yeah, but he has, I mean, as we'll talk about it later, he has sort of dropped a hint that maybe some minerals and some sort of refined metals might not make their way south if these tariffs go ahead.
The story we put up on Kelowna Now this morning, Danielle Smith's diplomatic efforts to avert U.S. tariffs seen as a high wire act by some political watchers, because she's, like putting Alberta first, and then obviously Canada's in there, but some people saying she might be betraying Canada while she puts Alberta first.
Well, I think it's one particular thing that she did, isn't it? Which is she contradicted, or she kind of broke ranks with the federal government, didn't she? And contradicted Melanie Joly
Hmm.
when she's, and also Doug Ford has kind of suggested this, hasn't he? That Canada might block oil and energy exports to the US. I mean, for obvious reasons, the Premier of Alberta, who in many ways is like the CEO of the world's biggest oil company, it's kind of like what her job is. She's not going to be happy about that, and kind of makes sense. But then she raised the specter of separation
Yes,
and said that
that's
you'd have a national unity crisis on your hands as well as the economic crisis caused by Trump. So, I mean, that's what's deemed to be maybe a little bit
she did play that card.
too much.
Hmm. She played that card for sure. Um,
Yeah.
More than 74,000 Canadians have died on healthcare wait lists since 2018. We talked about healthcare last year or yesterday, and at least 15,474 Canadians died in 2023 and 2024 alone. Um,
It's
the
it's
the
another one
wait
of
list.
those it's another one of those things where you kind of ask, it's like, how is this happening in our like futuristic world where we have all this great technology and we've not had a war, for example, which tend to disrupt countries in terrible ways. We've not had a war in the Western world really for 80 years or something like that, and yet we haven't figured out the absolute basics of civilization, and we still have things like this happening. It just sometimes kind of blows your mind.
Well, I know from personal experience, as somebody in this office here has been waiting 8 months for a scan that she's suffering from pain, and she 8 months just to get a scan.
It's terrible, isn't it? I mean, the worst of the worst is obviously when it comes to like oncology and people being diagnosed with a cancer, which must absolutely freak you out to the greatest extreme imaginable, because then the clock is ticking and you know that it's spreading through your body, and then being told that you have to wait an appallingly long amount of time before treatment begins. It's kind of that has to be the absolute worst of the worst. And obviously in BC they've even taken it to the extreme of sending patients down into the US to be treated there.
Yeah. Mark Carney on the show uh, with Jon Stewart paints himself as the outsider. There's a clip here we're going to play from Vasi Kapelas of CTV here.
Freeland. But in the case of Mark Carney, he is going to use that, I would anticipate, and you could hear it in the vernacular last night when he called himself an outsider, right? He's going to try to position himself as an outsider versus the ultimate insider in Chrystia Freeland. But what exactly from a policy perspective will they do to differentiate themselves? They're good friends. Chrystia Freeland was talking about how good friends they were in the summer and how much she consulted him as finance minister, and that her son is even, that he's godfather to her son. Like, those are the words that she used in the summer. So from a policy perspective, are they really going to be able to differentiate themselves very much? And then ultimately, if Carney is successful in selling the message that he is an outsider to Liberals, I think he will have a tougher time doing that, facing off against Conservatives who are at the ready to throw money at the idea that he is, in their view, anything but.
Yeah, so he holds 3 passports, and then there's a clip that's circulating right now when he was asked what he identifies as, and he says he identifies as a European, and yet he wants to run for prime minister and has not received a single vote yet, and then also says he's an outsider when he's been consulting with the Liberal government for quite a while now.
Well, not only that, but I mean, whoever is managing his campaign, I mean, there's a very, very small chance that they'll hear us have this conversation. But I would sort of plead with them just in the name of common sense, don't try and sell your candidate as an outsider. He is one of the ultimate insiders. He's been in charge of 2 of the sort of top 5 central banks in the world. He's beloved of all kinds of major sort of financial institutions. As you said, he's advised Justin Trudeau. Don't don't do that, would be my suggestion. It's a very, very stupid idea to try and represent Mark Carney as an outsider, and
Well,
I just, it
kind of
blows my mind again.
it kind of insults, our intelligence to say that he's an outsider and expect us to believe that.
Yeah, and then also attack as he did he's done it a few times, but as he did with Jon Stewart, to attack Pierre Poilievre for being effectively an insider, which is absolutely true. Pierre Poilievre has never had a real job. He's only ever been an MP. He's one of these very, very strange people that was obsessed with politics when he was like 12 years old or something like that. And that is okay, that's an attack line, but don't use that attack line while pretending that Mark Carney is not that kind of person. They're both very, very similar. It's just Mark Carney went down the route of finance and Poilievre went down the route of politics, like, straight away. So I just think it leaves them vulnerable. But I mean, it also highlights, I have to get this in here, highlights how strange this Liberal government is, in the sense that they all sort of know each other and have done for so many years, and it's very, very strange when you dig into it. I mean, like Mark Miller and Justin Trudeau, like best chums going back to when they were kids, and then like Dominic LeBlanc babysat Justin Trudeau, I believe. It's like that is very, very strange. What are the chances that
It's
the
a,
best kind of like 10 or
uh,
whatever people in Canada all happen to know each other, that they are the most qualified people for the job, and they all just happen to know each other when they were kids. It's that's another problem, which is a little bit separate from this, but I mean, I think that's why Canadians are so sick of being given the same people again and again and again to choose from as their political leaders.
it's like our own Game of Thrones.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Laurentian elite, I mean, that goes back a long time, doesn't it? And it's certainly true that it's almost pitiably, pathetically small, incestuous group of people that run Canada. But I just think it's a bit on the nose with the Trudeau government, and I can understand why Mark Carney would want to distance himself from that. But people are not that stupid. They know that he's
It,
deeply embedded in that whole culture and that milieu. They're not going to be fooled by the outsider label.
and the biggest policy that the Liberals have is the carbon tax, and Mark Carney is kind of like the architect of that, and also one of the biggest promoters of that. He sits on a chair as a board of this net zero board that with the next story we're going to talk about is Morgan Stanley the next in the list of banks that quit this group now as in ahead of the Donald Trump presidency. So most of the American big banks are quitting. We're still yet to hear from any of the Canadian banks whether they're going to stay in this group, but I imagine they're going to follow the money and they're going to follow the U.S. big banks. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to compete.
Yeah, well, Carney's been a big proponent of like ESG, hasn't he?
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to the DEI thing in a way, that all these little
Well,
acronyms that got rammed down our
well, we've
throats over the
seen
last 10 years.
we've seen the stories where like there's been pressure put on the Royal Bank of Canada and so on and so forth not to lend money to oil and gas companies, all kinds of stuff like pressures like that, right? And based on these ESG policies to really kind of like suppress Canadian natural resources.
Yeah, out of a sort of, I mean, some say out of a misplaced notion that Canada can by itself change the temperature of the Earth, which I'm sorry to say is not true. It's not possible that Canada can do that. It's too small, it's too insignificant. But that's kind of the notion, isn't it? And I think that's, again, something that Carney is going to be really pressured on.
Trump has right to consider. I don't know if I'm going to say this right. Chagos deal, as the UK is going to give back some islands.
Yeah, Chagos Islands, yeah. And this deal, like I say this quite a lot, but if you've got 10 minutes or something, anybody listening, have a read of this deal, because talk about things that will make your mind explode. This is one of those things. Because you said give back the islands. Mauritius, the country that stands to benefit to be given these islands, never owned them, have a very, very, very tenuous claim. Essentially, not a claim at all, really. I mean, it's nonsense. And the British state wants to give these islands to Mauritius and also £9 billion, which is like I guess like $15 billion front loaded, so like a huge sum given up front. Bear in mind, the British state is in a fiscal crisis right now. Bonds are like close to 5% now, 10-year bonds. The country is in a panic about its economic situation, but they're talking about giving £9 billion to Mauritius to possess the most strategic islands in the Indian Ocean. And then the British will be, in return for this gift, will be given a 50-year lease on a part of the islands that they already own now, where there's a US and UK airbase. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So now that Trump is going to peruse the details, I mean, it would be my feeling that he's probably going to nix it.
And then this is the one we were going to get to. BC Premier hints on ban on export of rare minerals to U.S. over the Trump tariff threats. Now they want to talk about resources.
Well, it's a very strange situation, isn't it? Where it's almost been like a dirty secret in the family or something, isn't it? In Canada, it's something that like nobody really wants to talk about, and if anything, want to try and downplay it and minimize it. It's like, oh, this disgusting. It's almost like a family that's made its money through some disreputable industry like slavery or something like that. It's like they just don't want to talk about it. They're embarrassed by it. But now that the US or Donald Trump has said, we're effectively going to destroy the Canadian economy because you don't give us anything of any value. Now all of a sudden, everybody wants to talk about minerals, including David Eby. It is kind of funny, isn't it? Though to be fair, I will say the BC government under Eby they have spoken quite a lot about minerals before this all happened. So
I
I
mean,
mean, but in the context of the Green Revolution and how to like fuel that.
that is our biggest asset. It's Canada is its natural resources, and that goes from minerals to oil and gas, to LNG, to forestry, agriculture. That is uranium supplies, all kinds of stuff. Canada is one of the richest nations in the world, and it is likely like not on the top of the list for most politicians to put it out there, especially not the current sitting governments. They don't really want to talk about resources and how we can best utilize them for the betterment of Canadians.
Yeah, well, every country kind of has something, don't they, that they bring to the table. So in Britain, it's kind of like finance, isn't it? It's banks and insurance companies and stuff like that. I guess in Japan, it's manufacturing, and also in Germany. And it's just the truth that is what Canada brings to the table. It brings
That's our
natural
strength.
resources.
Because in manufacturing, we just take auto, for example, we've said this before. Look, we manufacture about 1.5% of the world's autos. So we're not a manufacturing hub. Most of the technology companies, like the big ones, are south of the border, and that includes in the world. So technology really belongs to the Americans and the capital markets down there. Even if you look at the TSX, our stock market, dominated by resources, dominated, not a little bit, dominated by resources, and that's in all those sectors.
Yeah, and the real comparison I think to be made here is with Australia, because that is also true of Australia, what we've just said of Canada, that
Correct.
their meal ticket is, gold, diamonds, and all lithium and all sorts of things like that, minerals and resources. That's how they, butter their bread. But in Australia, they're not quite as funny about it. Like they know that. They're very honest with themselves, I think it's fair to say, across the parties in Australia. So that's the contrast. It's
Yep.
kind of like, why is that not true in Canada? Because they're
It's
essentially, in many ways, they're the kind of the same in an economic sense.
Yeah, they're worried in Australia that they can't sell their coal to China because China, converting to a lot of different diversified energy sources. And coal used to be one of the bigger ones for China, but Australia doesn't know where to sell its coal if China doesn't buy it.
Yeah, and I think it's a similar story with mutton as well and beef because they obviously have quite a lot of like ranches in Australia, don't they? And the big
Yeah.
buyer is China. So they try and put pressure on the Chinese, try and put pressure on the Australians, the same way they do with us with canola and things like that, because they're such a huge market. They kind of that's how they try and bully the likes of Canada and Australia.
And we do want feedback from people, though that kind of ends our political stuff for the most part here. We did get a comment in from a chap named Gordon saying that we must be getting paid by Fox News or Donald Trump. I can assure you that we received no money from Donald Trump or Fox News or the Russians, for that matter, if that's the next accusation. We get no funding from the federal government either. We don't get any funding from the Liberal government or any other government other than, like most of the legacy media gets funded. We receive zero funding. So thanks for the comment, Gordon, but we don't get any funding from Fox or Donald Trump, just to set the record straight there.
Yeah, Donald, you're missing out with that potential investment, isn't he?
Yeah. And Fox News, in the United States, they do have quite a bit more media outlets. We only really have three like national outlets here in Canada. We have CTV, CBC, and Global, and Global is on the ropes. If you look at their stock chart, not doing very well at all, and cutting back. If you want to support local independent media, then it needs to be a fair playing field, and Bill C-18 needs to be repealed.
Yeah, certainly. And I'd also say about global, and this applies to CTV, CBC, everyone else, not only are they struggling in a financial sense, but in a reputational sense as well. And I'm sure they would admit that. And in fact, the news editor that you interviewed did concede that, didn't he? That it's hard now with the loss of trust and so on. So yeah, I mean it's a tough time for everybody in the media, but
Yeah, I
it
think,
certainly doesn't help when the government gives money to certain organizations and not other ones.
and for us to question the federal government, it's kind of our job to question the federal government. Power needs to be held accountable, and right now this power is in disarray.
Non-existent.
Yeah. Moving on to markets. Gold again, and chopping around like up one day, down the next day, but still holding that $2,600 line, 26 to 27, bouncing in there. And you can look at that band, but it is again showing higher lows as it chops there. So the direction looks like it wants to go up, and it's looking like catalyst. And we may see that catalyst happen on January 20th, because that's when the markets are going to find more certainty into where it's going. And then Bitcoin, again, taking another run at 100,000. So again, it does show lower highs. So this time, it needs to beat that last high, to kind of get some confidence there. If you look at the chart there on the far right there, you can see that it's lower highs. So again, the majority of the support for Bitcoin is positive. And with the Donald Trump presidency and the new SEC chair and different things like that, and even more companies starting to put Bitcoin on their balance sheets. So there is a lot of wind in the sails for Bitcoin for sure. And then the Canadian dollar. Definitely need to find a leader for Canada before this will probably find some direction. This is showing the turmoil and the weakness. And Canada's a resource-based nation. If we utilized our resources, this chart would look the other way. And I'm confident in saying that. But right now, it looks rudderless and it looks like it wants to go down. In our AI segment, AI is getting better and better at fooling people. So some lady with Brad Pitt making an appeal, like they used some AI generated images, and she ended up sending him some money.
Yeah, over $1 million Canadian. It would be, yeah, pretty. I mean, it's a lot of people have been mocking this woman, which is a bit cruel, I think. But it does. The first question that I have is, how could you not see that these were fake? I mean, they're so low quality. It's such bad images. I mean, especially I don't know what they were using. You could do better ones in Grok,
Yeah,
like with a
sure.
very short prompt, like Brad Pitt in a hospital bed would give you a much better quality image than that. But I don't know. I think she was in the details of the story suggest that she was in a pretty rough spot at the time, this woman, and she was just exploited by these horrible people.
Qatar Airlines creates AI influencer for marketing their airline. And we're seeing this more and more. So they've got their own AI influencer instead of using like like influencers that they're all over the place. There's one in Europe right now too, as a travel guide that and they've made her um, to be like she can travel with you too, and based on where you are, tell you where to eat and what like show you a bunch of things. So these AI influencers are going to start to dominate social media.
Yeah, well, I suppose from the consumer's perspective, they're no more or less real than an actual so-called influencer who, you're
Yeah.
never going to meet. You're never going to see them do anything like in a real human context. They're just going to post pictures and videos of themselves, which we can just artificially create. It's almost like nothing changes really in that sense, does it?
And then from the perspective of a business, then you get control over this AI influencer, a better control, because like if you hired somebody as an AI influencer and they're promoting your brand, and then the next brand they promote kind of doesn't agree with your current brand, then some of that might shine on you. So this gives them more control of what that brand is they're spending money on.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe it'll be a niche in the future to actually use a real life human.
Maybe we could be replaced. Maybe that would help Gord. He would probably be more impressed if we could have an AI influencer on here and they could talk. And then the AI would interpret it, which political leaning you have, and then do the stories based on your own echo chamber instead of, like having you hear things you disagree with.
Yeah, that's a scary future that you map out, but I can believe it. I reckon
Yeah.
that is possible.
Elon Musk really promoting Grok, and I've been trying it out this morning. And so it is really stepped up. Try using Grok from the XAI. Now you don't even have to download Twitter or use a user of X. You can actually download Grok itself from the App Store, and you can download that, and you can generate images, analyze pictures, and up to 4 images. I was playing with it this morning, so no different than ChatGPT. You can upload 4 images, ask it to analyze those images, tell you where it is, analyze it for calories. You can take a picture of a vegetable and ask it to tell you what's the best recipes for it, what the nutritional value is, and you can do that the same thing for food. You could do that with pictures of yourself and ask you to analyze your fitness level. You could upload images of fashion and ask what you think of this latest fashion. All kinds of things you can do with it. And apparently Grok is scheduled at some time to end up in the Teslas, and then you'll be able to communicate with it in a speech, um, and talk to your car as you drive into work, asking about weather, what's going on in the news, all kinds of things.
I mean, it's got to the point now, I think it's probably safe to say that any big tech company, or almost it's almost true, I think, to say that like any big company at all that doesn't have AI or like a deal with an AI company is going to just be left in the dust at this point. I mean, why would you use a social media app that didn't have AI now? You know, it's kind of
Well,
it's made the old tech completely redundant.
even Facebook has their own AI llama that they're integrating, and it's going to make it for our companies like ourselves that do marketing um, tougher and tougher because llama supposedly is going to help you write your ads and work on your ads as you see results. So there's
Mm.
just so much being done by AI these days. And when while we're talking about Elon, there was a tweet, I didn't put it in here. Somebody talking about Elon promoting Pierre Polyev and freaking out that he's shouldn't be interfering in Canadian politics. But these same people were just loving it when Barack Obama endorsed Justin Trudeau for prime minister. And on Elon's side, he is actually a Canadian. So there's that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Obama put his fingers on the scale in a few
Mm,
political
yeah,
elections, including Brexit, famously.
yeah.
He really kind of came in on the side of staying in the European Union, and so did Mark Carney.
Yeah, they tend to, these people that scream about it now tend to have elusive memories when it comes to when they were all in on what Barack was doing, but completely different story when somebody else is doing it with policies politics you don't agree with.
Yeah, and it's been that way for a while now, hasn't it? It's become quite tiresome.
And then we got a little clip here from the Cybertrucks going, helping out the firefighters and police in the Los Angeles fires. We're going to play a little clip here of the Cybertruck convoy.
Owners drove into the fire zone to help with connectivity using Starlink satellite technology developed by SpaceX in Hawthorne. First responders have been dealing with poor Wi-Fi and difficult cell service in the Pacific Palisades, Malibu area.
This is essential for our public information officers and for our incident commanders, and even for our strike teams who are out there trying to communicate. And we have radio communications, but
see if you can get it back while we're waiting. The we lost technical feed. We might need a Starlink satellite here. So the Starlink provides energy as well as global communication. So like the fireman says, we have radios, but we don't have like cell communication, that stuff. So the Cybertrucks give them the power to do it and the communications ability to use their cell phones and different things that they need to when they work in those areas or they've lost all the infrastructure. And then in our EV segment here, we got a picture of the new Model Y set next to the Cybertruck, and you notice that the light bar looks like it's going to be the signature for the new models of Teslas, right? That laser beam light bar.
Yeah, it's very, very distinctive.
Yeah. And then the meme, courtesy of Pierre Polyev, showing what the Canadian government looks like to what the Americans are looking like, and saying we need a huddle here, and what we need is an election so that we can have a clear mandate and a leader that Canadians put their voice behind.
I mean, it's terrible, isn't it? What a terrible time to be in disarray and confusion. But I mean, I would say that the premiers, when I watched the sort of opening remarks this morning there in Ottawa, they do seem to be on the ball. They do seem to be working together quite well, and Trudeau's there and Trudeau's ministers. They are doing something, but we all know that behind the scenes there's this fierce battle going on to lead the Liberal Party, and it comes at a very unfortunate time.
Kevin O'Leary was interviewed on CBC, and they got into it pretty heated. I advise you to go watch that too, and just to show you where Canada is at, right? So, and then just to show people, the people that have said that they're going to run. Who do we have so far that say they're going to run? We have Karina Gold, who's stepped up and said she's going to do it. We anticipate Mark Carney to step up. And this is what it's going to cost you. A refundable payment of $50,000 on January 23rd. And then they go to non-refundable. So I guess that's the do or die date, January 30th. Another payment of 50. You want to change that image there, Rommel? You can leave out that other stuff now for now. We don't. And then another non-refundable payment of 125 by February 7th and another 125,000 by February 17th.
Yeah, it's serious money, that, isn't it? I mean, I
Yeah,
don't
so
know how a random MP is gonna like a true outsider, unlike Mark Carney, but an actual outsider. I don't know how they could possibly compete,
it
really.
seems like I don't know the history of it, but this seems like a very large amount, and it's been talked about that this is unusually high. So wonder why this is put out there. It seems
It
to
could
be
be that it's a barrier that
yeah.
they know only a couple can jump over.
Yeah, that's the obvious conclusion that someone could come to, that it separates a lot of people from even being contenders in this. Because if you want to run for mayor in Kelowna, it's in the what is it, like a couple $1,000s?
Yeah, very, and also the money spent pales in comparison to this. I mean, they're saying that you can spend a maximum of $5 million. But I
Yeah.
don't know, it probably helps to raise that cash for the Liberals as well,
Well, that's
$350,000. I
what I mean.
mean,
Like,
that's at least going to pay for one assistant social media analyst or something in the
maybe they
Liberal
should hire
Party.
some AI assistants, because I know they have an army of bots there that work the work the X accounts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in our good news segment, we were going to play you a video of the cougar, but it looks like maybe we do have it. If you just take off the moniker there, Rommel's having some fun there. You got to take off the other. There, no, yeah, we'll get there. So we don't like. I mean, if we had budget if Fox was paying us and Trump was paying us, we could probably get through these better and faster, right? So if you're listening, Donald Trump or Fox News, you can send your checks and they can help us out with our technical difficulties every now and then. It doesn't look like we're gonna get it. We're gonna pass on that. You can go out and clonanow.com. You can check our 5 things, and there's a video of the cougar. Well, someone's in their hot tub. You watched it, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, it's like personally, I would say I'm not so sure how appropriate it is for good news because it's kind of like terrifying news. If you
Mhm.
just sat there, if you sat there in your hot tub next to some trees, like next to the woods, and then you just see some eyes looking at you from like a couple of feet away, and it's
Yeah.
a mountain lion, that's
Yeah.
horrifying.
I had a similar scare myself a number of years ago in our hot tub, because I used to go down at like 5 in the morning in the dark, and then you're sitting in the hot tub, and the lights from the hot tub obviously blind you to seeing outside. And I heard this huge crash because it's outside, and I thought, was that a cougar? Is that a bear? Or was it? Turns out it was a deer that was trying to jump the chain link fence of the neighbors there, and it crashed into the chain link fence. But it
Well,
made me
when it's
really
dark,
leery of going into the hot tub.
yeah, when it's dark like that, you feel extra vulnerable anyway, don't you? So any sort of big sound, like
Yeah.
even if it is just a deer, it's like really
Yeah, and
messes
you
with you.
can't see out into the darkness, right? Because the lights from where you're sitting in the like that hot tub's lit up, so you can only see inside the hot tub, but you can't see into the darkness, right? So you don't know if that cougar's like standing a couple feet away, or it's a bear, or it's a deer. And we've had bears in our backyard, and I'm sure cougars maybe too, but we have a lot of deer for sure.
Yeah, but it's cool at the same time. It's like a very, very. It's one talking about sort of Canada's strengths. Let's say, okay, really good things about Canada. It is pretty great that we have wildlife like that. These large mammals, large predators.
Hmm.
Not many places in the developed world have that. Like Europe, basically entirely denuded of that kind of those
Well,
kind of animals, except in a few tiny little places in the Alps.
the majority of Canada is still wilderness. And then, like, and there's another story on clonenow.com you can go read. There's an operation underway right now to capture BC wolves to relocate them to Colorado. I don't know if anybody's asking the wolves if they want to relocate to Colorado, but it appears like they're going to trap 15 wolves a year over the next 3 years, and 3 to 5 years, and then relocate them to Colorado. I don't know if
And no tariff.
These wolves are gonna, claim asylum in Colorado, or what they're gonna do.
But we need to threaten a wolf tariff, don't we? If they
Yeah,
want to reintroduce wolves.
you can't have our wolves. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it is that is another area. I mean, I think you would say that counts as soft power rather than like real hard power, but it's another cool strength that Canada has, I guess. And the Americans, especially in places like that, they are increasingly interested in reintroducing
But
wolves and sometimes bears as well, aren't they? Like grizzlies.
this nonsense that Donald Trump has raised about taking over Canada and that maybe some good comes out of it, and we end up creating an economic union similar to the European Union, where we don't have a border to cross between Canada and the US, where we can share, where we can kind of travel between the countries, but we still have our identity as Canada, just as France has its identity, and you know what I mean? I can't say England now because they're not part of the EU, but you still have your identity. But because the two nations are very strong economic partners, there's no denying that, and we have a lot of stuff that they need, and they have a lot of stuff we need.
Yeah, well, and also unlike the European Union, which is quite brittle at the minute and quite sort of it's under a lot of pressure right now, the European Union. But one of the reasons for that is because they're all so different. The Germans and French are very, very different people. They speak a
Mhm.
different language. They're like literally even like a different ethnicity that goes back centuries,
Well,
you
they
know?
fought two wars against each other as well.
Yeah, and all the blood spilled. Whereas Canada and the US, speak the same language, have just about the same or very similar legal system. They're already integrated in a pretty sort of profound way.
Yeah,
Like not many countries in the world have that kind of economic integration.
and we're obviously dominated by American media. That just plays out. Where did Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney go to do interviews? They went to the United States. I mean, and plus the media has been in a lot of the media, and I guess that's the reason for the CBC is they say it's to combat that just influx of American media into Canada.
Yeah, and then I mean, then the CBC produces things like Schitt's Creek, for example, like one of their biggest successes in recent years. And yet, I feel like do foreigners even know that that's Canadian?
Yeah.
It's kind of a lot of foreigners genuinely don't know the difference. They absolutely cannot tell the difference between Canada and the US or Canadians and Americans. And it's kind of that tells you a lot, I think, about the similarities. So if an economic union was actually going to work, I think it would be Canada and the US. It's certainly got better prospects than the European Union, which is a bit of a mess right now.
Yeah, we're more aligned than we are unaligned or misaligned. That there is more common between us than there is uncommon, for sure. I think the politics of it, you're getting like again the comments from somebody saying, because the left definitely does not want to listen most of the time. They just want to attack, and without listening, because it seems like they're okay with it when it's done one way, but when it happens the other way, then they're definitely screaming about it.
Well, it's certainly an accusation we've heard a lot of in recent years, and it's something that both Trump and Polyev, just two examples, have made a lot of noise about, haven't they? And won a lot of popularity by using those, attack lines.
There you go. And that's again, we will talk about your comments. You can send them whether they're positive or negative. Comments are comments. And we ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel here, like and subscribe, and on X as well, and on LinkedIn, and on. We have a newsletter that goes out 365 days a year, and we hope to get our Facebook and Instagram back at some point as well when Bill C-18 is repealed, and we hope that Mark Zuckerberg comes to his senses and says that Canadians deserve a right to read news on his platforms. Because he does say now that news and politics are important to his platform, which was completely different than what he said before.
The exact opposite, in fact, yeah.
And guess who's sitting together at the inauguration? Two people that definitely weren't friends a little while ago. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are going to be seatmates.
That's very interesting, isn't it? It's almost like Zuckerberg is kind of taking him under his, Musk is almost like taking him under his wing a bit, hasn't he? And it's like he's like a mentor to him now or something.
The world is changing, and we're here to talk you through it. So, with that said, we thank you for watching Kelowna Now. We'll be back tomorrow morning. I do have a fitness segment that I do with Liz Sage from Team Fitness later on today. I think it's at 2 o'clock. So if you're interested in fitness and increasing your health span, not just your lifespan, and looking after yourself more so, and maybe relieving some of the pressure on our healthcare system, we'll be there. And with that said, we thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now,